serious. What disturbing thing did you find out about someone after they died? My mother had serious buyer's remorse over me. I was adopted at 6 months, and she had this textbook idealistic concept of what raising a child should be, how they should behave, and what they should do when I didn't live up to this expectation and acted like a normal child. She couldn't handle it and took me to various doctors, child psychologists, and other quack practitioners, insisting I was hyperactive, all in an attempt to mold me into the perfect child in her eyes. She kept daily diaries on this, as well as hundreds of audio tapes where she voiced her displeasure in me being an overactive and undisciplined child. She even kept an expense account from when they adopted me up until her death, listing what they spent on me: birthdays, Christmas, random purchases, school, etc. All detailed down to the penny, that nobody cared about them and that made them not care about themselves. This happened very recently. It was a guy I only knew in my childhood. My mom asked me to reach out to him because he was having health issues, and I am a nurse practitioner. Super nice guy, very fun. When I was a kid, seemed outgoing to me, but rarely saw him at get-togethers. Super. A long story short, I gave him some medical advice, talked to him for about 45 minutes. In that time, I really learned a lot about where he was in life. I even offered to go to his house when I checked up on him a few days later. He refused. I told my mom, who told the family that he will not seek medical attention, needs therapy, and will need to be dragged from the home and taken to the hospital. 3 weeks later, my mom tells me he died. I know he was regularly dog sitting for one nephew and babysitting for another. All those people in his family, and he had a big family, and not one tried to get him to a hospital. Not one looked at him and said, "I don't care what you say. We care enough about you that you're going to the hospital." He felt he wasn't worth it, and the people in his life proved it. I have very good memories with that family as a whole, going to their pool parties and stuff as a kid, but this incident has really changed my view about them recently. My grandfather ran a gas station from the late 40s to the mid-80s. He and my grandmother had 13 kids, 10 surviving, so there was never much money in the house. My mom and her siblings shared beds. Hand-me-downs were the rule. The family kept a large garden to feed everyone, etc. I never thought of them as poor growing up, but they really had to scrim to get by anyway. After my grandfather died in the early 2000s, my grandmother learned of a secret bank account he'd kept for decades. It wasn't malicious. He had just always been fearful of dying young, and he wanted to make sure my grandmother would have something to live on in case he actually did die young. When the rest of the family found out, at least a few of my aunts and uncles were pissed because of how financially hard their childhood was. I don't know if it's disturbing, but it was definitely a shock to our family. I idolized my dad's mom when I grew up. I saw her as my best friend and couldn't imagine a life without her. Then my dad died, and I learned that my dad's mom was and still is a monster. It's not like she killed anyone that I know of. I was around 18 to 19 when we cleaned my dad's house out. I found empty bottles of Jittermask that I knew my dad didn't touch. He had cancer in his liver, lungs, and bowel. Who stayed in my dad's house when he was in the hospital. Yeah, his mom. We also discovered that things were missing from his house, and when we asked her about it, she accused us, me and my sibling, for being the reason our dad died. She then refused to come to his funeral because I accused her of stealing. Well, I just asked if she knew where some things were. Now remember, this is a person I've looked up to my whole life. Later, I discovered that she had scammed my dad for money. He owned her house, and 2 months before he died, when we were all aware that he didn't have much time left, she tricked him into signing documents that said that me and my sister can't sell the house until dad's mom dies, and she only needs to pay $400 per month for a small house, huge garden, and her own beach. We also found out that she didn't pay her rent for the whole time my dad was sick. House like that with the ocean near and everything is worth at least $1,000 per month. After we found this out, she started calling my mom, who was not together with my dad for many years, but was huge support for he, and that's during this time while drunk, and telling my mom how awful parents her and my dad was. She kept accusing me and my sister of our dad's cancer and would always be drunk when she called. I started to realize that I'd never seen her completely sober, and things like her giving me whiskey when I was 12 and had a cold didn't seem so cool anymore. I lost it. This was the person I thought I could trust the most in this world. Everything just fell, and I started to say who she really was: an abusive alcoholic with a huge gambling addiction. I began to ask around about my father and his childhood. Things I thought I knew turned out to be lies his mom had told me, and nothing made sense to me. It took years to realize why my dad was so protective of me and my sister. He never had someone looking out for him. My dad's mom didn't give a about her kids. If they wanted something, they could find her in the local pub or plane bingo. She went to court for custody of my dad, making my grandpa lose everything, and when she won, she did everything she could to stop the contact between them. This ruined my dad's relationship to his father, and this later also ruined our relationship to our grandpa. As my dad was growing up, he had to take care of himself and his sister. By the age of 10, he cooked food for them, washed their clothes, and made sure that they got to daycare and school. They had to wait by the mailbox every time so their mom wouldn't steal their money that they got from their fathers. I know that there is a lot more to the story. I know that I don't even know a third of it yet. I'm just so sad that my dad never was able to break free from this abusive alcoholic, which when I asked my mom to tell me everything she knew about my dad's childhood, she said, "Are you sure that you really want to?" No, I know that my story isn't so effed up as others in the thread, but it really messed me up. I know it's a Bible of text, but this isn't even half of it. Thank you for taking the time to read. If you did, my great-grandma was a moonshiner in her youth along with her brothers and sisters. They ran shine to afford food in rural Kentucky also. She apparently told Jim Jones yes, that Jim Jones too, off according to my grandma, her daughter. It was the only time she'd ever used language like that during his cult recruiting days. Jones had shown up at my great-grandma's church as a guest preacher. That woman had an amazing nose for her, and when he tried to recruit her, she told him to, off right there in the church parking lot. All my life she was this sweet but the curmudgeonly old lady who was set in her ways, but would make you the best peach cobbler she possibly could for whatever the event you were having, even if she didn't like any of the people there. Imagining her just looking at this dude square in the eyes and cussing him out makes me cackle. I knew my dad was dating younger women, but after he died, we were sorting through his paperwork and I found out that for the past 7 years, their various women had all been the exact same age as me at the time he was seen. How did I find this out? He had a restraining order against one where it listed her birth date. He received correspondence from one who was in prison on child trafficking charges. A Google search of the woman in prison revealed her age and family members who spoke to the current woman. I managed to successfully avoid them all. Relayed her age about 3 years before he died. He'd sold his house, made $200,000-ish on the sale, then moved into an apartment. There was an envelope stuffed full of receipts showing he had slowly drained that account by withdrawing between $1,000 to $3,000 in cash over the 3 years since the house sale. He had once drunkenly told me he was in love with a stripper, and through the grapevine I heard the woman he'd been seeing when he died was a prostitute, so I'm assuming that's where all the cash went. No judgment to sex workers, they gotta get paid, but damn, that was not the money management my dad taught me. I was angry, but of course devastated. He was gone. I felt like this wasn't the same man who raised me. I went to therapy and that helped, but I don't yearn for my dead father the same way I do my mother, and I think all the above is a big reason why my aunt was a single mom who constantly had new boyfriends moving in and out of her house, which I always found weird because my aunt was also super religious and judgmental about the sex lives of others. The part I found out only after my aunt died is that one of the boyfriends sexually abused my female cousin, and when my aunt found out about it, she blamed her own daughter and called her a for letting it happen. My cousin told this to me at her mom's/my aunt's funeral. Meanwhile, other relatives judge my cousin and say she was a bad daughter because my cousin moved far away when she was an adult and rarely had contact with her mom. The best lesson I've learned from this is never judge a person because they're distant from their parents. They may have a very good reason, not too disturbing per se, but it definitely a letdown, and it changed my view about them. I loved and respected my grandma all my life, so when she got sick and passed equals away, I was really heartbroken. A few years later I found out me and my sister were her least favorite grandkids because my dad was poor. It made sense to me. Suddenly all my cousins would get gold bracelets or nice stuff for special occasions while I'd get $20 whenever my cousins were visiting. Grandma would cook all their favorite food while I and my sis had to stay away from the dining table till they're done. Basically, we just eat scraps. I just didn't realize all this until my mom pointed it out to me. I guess since I've been treated that way since young, I never think of her any differently. My maiden name is super unique. Usually, we can trace our family to literally one village in England and to one family in particular. I am not white. I saw someone with the same surname as mine and invited him on FB. Turns out his dad was a genealogist who tracked our family out of England and all around the world. We were introduced to the white side of the family, and we call each other cousins. Lol. Weirdly, a few towns over there's another family with the same name as ours, but no known relation to us, but the same names repeat. I know this because I met someone with exactly the same name and surname as my brother where I used to work. Suddenly, all the weird doctor's appointments that were missed made sense. 2 kids with uncommon identical names and a shared identical surname that lived near each other. My new uncle told us why my great-great-granddad didn't die when we thought he did. He literally disappeared and head of the second family. They were raised within 20 kms of each other and he died in some kind of accident. All the men's names in the family repeat. My uncle died suddenly in a car crash when I was 18. My aunt has schizophrenia and went off her meds after he died, so when she was talking about eyes in the house, we lied to get her back into therapy to help her. Eventually, she couldn't stay in the house anymore and we went to help clean it out. We found cameras everywhere, behind paintings, in the bookshelves, just everywhere. Eventually, we found a safe tucked away in a small opening in his closet, and when we finally cracked it open, there was 2 unregistered guns in it alongside a wad of cash. My uncle was already very wealthy. We don't know why he specifically had this cash set aside, or why he had illegal guns, or why he bugged his entire house, but we suspect my aunt's illness and paranoia was worsened by him, and she wasn't always as delusional as he made her out to be. In better news, my aunt now lives in Florida with a caretaker in a condo she paints for a living and is very happy. My grandparents were married just after my grandfather returned from World War II. When he got back, he and my grandmother had 7 kids. It was a big Catholic family. My grandfather was a kind, honorable man that loved his wife, and they raised good kids that have all turned into well-adjusted adults by now. My grandparents have both passed away, and some of the kids and grandkids have messed around with 23 in my genetic testing. As luck would have it, some guy out of the blue has started messaging us with a high enough percentage of genetic match that it stands to reason that he is the son of my grandfather. No one in my family has ever heard of him or his mother. Evidently, before his mother passed away on her deathbed, she identified a man by my grandfather's name as his father. Sounds like old grandpa picked up some strange before shipping out. The awful part is, this guy has spent his whole life not knowing who his father is. Poor guy. Thanks for listening. The subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more things you don't want to know. Let us know in the comments what you think about these stories.